Hello, and welcome to the Everyday Business Problems Podcast. I'm your host, Dave Crysler. Each episode, we talk to business leaders and subject matter experts to learn about the challenges they've overcome and the challenges they still face. You'll hear fresh insights, real talk, and get inspiration to grow your business. Hey everybody, so excited to be welcoming Sean Storms to the podcast today. Sean is the founder of DCI, a growth advisory firm helping B2B companies create real marketplace separation and profitable demand without leaning on old sales and marketing tactics. After a 27-year corporate career, he built a proprietary framework focused on operational precision, continuous improvement, organizational fitness, and designing unmatched customer value. The system has helped clients achieve double-digit profitable growth and meaningful jumps in enterprise value within a year. Sean, thanks so much for coming on the Everyday Business Problems Podcast.
Dave, thanks so much. It's an absolute honor. I can't wait to get this going.
Yeah, man. I had the pleasure of meeting you earlier this year and have really just enjoyed all of the conversations that we've had. Definitely have some incredible insights to share. So excited to get into it.
The feeling is mutual. I follow you on LinkedIn, and yes, you and I have had multiple conversations. For those listening and viewing this, follow Dave Crysler. The guy's really smart.
Well, thanks. Thanks for the plug there. So let's dive in, man. I think, we obviously get along so well because we are, disciples and of one and the same. But I think that all of the conversations we've had, some of the really key things that kind of come out that I want to dive into, we both talk about, let's say, profitable growth, right? But you extend that into these force multipliers. And I think for a lot of folks that are going to be listening to this and watching this, they're thinking, hey, my revenue's up, things are great, right? We're growing. And so what I'd love to dive into is just how do you help leaders see the difference and what really is the difference behind that profitable growth and what are those force multipliers?
Boy, there's a big one. Let me start with the middle part first that you just said, and that would be this. As a guy who has led over 700 salespeople cumulatively in his career at the Fortune 500 level, the lower mid-market and small business, I'm telling you that probably 8 out of 10 salespeople and their bosses, they're just grabbing at straws when they're forecasting. It's the truth. And so when they have good months, they think they know why they've had a good month, but then the next month, right, it goes up and then it goes down. They can never tell you why it's down. There's always some excuse. The fact of the matter is, I'll get to force multipliers in a minute, but this guy that you've heard me talk about many times, and unfortunately most in business have forgotten, he's been lost to history, and that's W. Edwards Deming. So at some point, if you want to bring up Deming somewhere in the podcast, we can dive a little deeper. But if I learned anything a while ago about what Deming believed in, and this is the guy, for those who don't know who he was, who pretty much taught all of the Japanese business leadership after World War II how to dominate worldwide. And eventually they did. They were making nothing but junk up until about, the 1970s. And then by the time the 80s and 90s hit, middle America just went away because the manufacturing went over to Japan. So the guy is a deity over there. Thank God he came back to the US and taught Ford and Procter & Gamble, a bunch of others, how to do it right. The one thing I learned from Deming was the difference between random variation, right? So 1 month sales are up, if we're going to keep this to sales, because we could talk about operations, finance, IT, any discipline you want, is that 1 month it goes up, next month it goes down. Then it goes up 2 months, then it goes down 2 months. More than likely, it's just random variation. And as a guy who meets with probably 50 CEOs every year, not that they all choose to do business with me, but as I meet with them, they have, as Deming would say, no understanding of a system. They don't understand what's causing the highs to be high, the lows to be low. And the kicker is this, and then I'll turn it back over to you. Most of those ups and downs are falling within a system. And within that system are the same factors that make it go up and the same factors that make it go down. So as I always say to them, more than likely, you can't differentiate between those 2 points. But Dave, what happens if they've had 3 successive months of growth and then it goes down? How does leadership react?
Well, they're always scratching their head and always looking for the next tactic and or tool to plug in to fill the gap.
And as you introduce all that to plug in to fill the gap, does that make variation, does it lessen it or does it widen it?
Well, I think we both know the answer to that, but, to shed some light for other folks, it obviously widens it.
Yeah. And as it widens, as it gets bigger and bigger, that variation, that's where the P&L tanks, and nobody wants that.
Yeah.
The force multipliers briefly, and I'm sorry, did you want to respond to that?
No, go ahead. Keep going.
So when we talk about force multipliers, a couple of words to throw out here. I've had, again, senior leaders say to me, man, how do we go exponential? So in their language, their lingo, that means how do we scale, probably. The key word here is compound. How do we spend the same or less money, but have something compound and have it improve? So, I spent a long, long time, believe it or not, on the B2C side. So that would be, looking at companies like Apple is a great example, right? Steve Jobs and what he did, looking at, depending where you live, Five Guys Burgers and Fries, which I think was founded in Michigan.
Yep.
And just, choose whatever it is. However you feel about Tesla, it doesn't matter. Look at what they did. Tesla, no marketing, no sales, no pricing gimmicks, no dealerships, no nothing. Now, yes, they had great government backing is usually the argument there. But in terms of getting, striking the genuine customer chord, they just killed it. And that fascinated me, being on the B2B side all my life and usually on the industrial side. How do you do that? Are there force multipliers there that without additional expense, effort, time, can you make this thing go exponential? And the answer is yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so much to unpack in just the first 4 minutes here. It's challenging to know which direction to take because there's so many avenues with that. I love the call to the B2C side of things. I think it's something that obviously people can resonate with. You called out some great ones. Chick-fil-A we've talked about previously, right? Like there's kind of no end in sight. And I think some of what I see, and I'd love your perspective on this, because I think this starts to unpack a bit of the gap, and then obviously we'll get deeper into this. But I think the challenge for most folks that are leading organizations today is that it seems easy to kind of outside looking into those B2C orgs say like, well, of course, it makes so much sense, right? But then when it comes to applying that internally to our own B2B selves, it becomes a bit more difficult. And my theory around that is just because they've not experienced whether it's the point about variation, it's Deming, it's all of those contextual things that add up to this, right? And so it's an experience, it's a gap around that. I'd love to get your insights if you're seeing anything different or if you've seen anything different, because I think that starts to kind of unpack the conversation of the work that you're really doing and kind of how we can get into that.
Sure. So let's talk about that, right? This is a little bit in depth. Most of the time, people on the B2B side will say, well, it's not a fair comparison. It's not apples to apples to look at B2C because on our side, we have multiple decision makers. We've got to, get it through 6 layers before. And of course, my first question is, why are you going through 6 layers? If you have something so attractive and you've built a very distinctive organization, over time, not immediately, they will start to come to you. And I'm sure we'll talk about that on this podcast of how that starts to happen. Obviously, I've got tons of examples and case studies of how that happens. So let me give you one example from a personal perspective. Imagine the pressure I had on me. I was one of the top 2 guys at Yellow Freight System, which became Yellow Freight, which then became Yellow. And of course, they went out of business a year or 2 ago. But they'd been around almost 100 years. And I was with them at the height of when they were the number one, LTL, less than truckload carrier in the country. I get brought in from the field where I had been in operations. I had run a small branch, so I had some sales behind me. And they were going to do TQM, right? Total quality management, because the Q word had become very popular at that time because the Japanese were kicking our butt. So we were hauling a lot of freight for a lot of big companies, and they were saying, what are you guys doing about quality? So the company starts this quality effort. The short story is I get brought in from the field, right? I had to interview, and I was lucky enough to be the first guy under the head guy under TQM. I wrote all of Yellow's continuous improvement training and learned a lot from Deming. He was still alive at the time, and learned a lot about process improvement. The pressure that I faced was that I was told when I went into the corporate office after being a field guy for 7 years that I would eventually have to go back to the field. So I go back to the field and I run this monster branch just south of Washington, D.C. in Manassas, Virginia. So we had all of Northern Virginia, all of Washington, D.C. It's about a $90 million a year operation. It's sizable. We got 150 people, so on and so forth. The thing is losing money hand over fist. And that's why I got promoted and was put into that. And of course, everybody that I'd been teaching quality to for 3 years was like, okay, hotshot, let's see how you do now that you got to go fix something. You will get this immediately, but I think your audience will appreciate it. So I take what I learned, right? And I go in there and I'm like, you don't look at what can we improve right from the get-go, which is what most of them do. Deming used to say, stop going directly to solutions. You don't even understand the problem yet. And I know you and I traded some LinkedIn posts in the recent past about root causes. So I started looking at root causes, and I'm talking to the supervisors, the teamsters. I'm talking to everybody, just saying, well, what's messed up about this place? Well, the one that was obvious was you don't have to come from trucking to know that if you're bringing back freight every day on that truck that didn't get delivered, it's not a good thing.
Yeah. Yep.
Because now you have to go out and deliver it again the next day. It's going to get moved around in the evening. As the night shift starts to pour more freight into that trailer and rejigger everything around so that, it's in the right order. So you're going to have more damage. So our loss and damage was through the roof. There's waste and rework. Having to go 2 or 3 times out to deliver the same darn boxes and packages, that was waste and rework. We were losing our tail. Dave, do you think the customers were happy that that's how we were operating?
I'm guessing maybe not.
So our delivered service, which should have been up around 97%, was at 88%. And in the trucking industry, that's horrible.
Yeah.
So the end of the story is this. It was the rank and file. I got close to those guys, and I was having a meeting with the drivers and the dockmen together one day and found out that even though they were in the brotherhood, they were teamsters. They didn't like each other. And so they were sabotaging each other. So I had to broker this peace treaty between these two warring sides, the night side that ran the dock operation, the day side where they went out and delivered. Everything got better. We got up to 97%. We turned that thing around inside of 9 months. Was probably, it took 9 months, but we turned it around. What do you think happened to customer satisfaction?
Yeah, through the roof, I bet.
What do you think happened to operating costs?
Yep. Maybe took a couple of points out of that.
And what do you think happened to profitability and productivity?
Yeah.
It's an ecosystem.
That's awesome.
It's an ecosystem. So we have to look at the whole business as an ecosystem. And I think B2C does that in a really good way. And I will say, so what I say to them is there's a reason why we start with operational precision, because I just described it. You have to go to the root causes and say, are we delivering on the customer promise? If not, we got to start there. Then we can get into organizational fitness, right? Are we really purpose-driven? Do we understand core behaviors? And what is mission? And how is that different than purpose? And last but not least, what I just described really was an unmatched or an unprecedented customer value proposition. Chick-fil-A, who you mentioned, right? They're operationally precise. They do it really well, whatever they do. And to hire the right people and then train them just to say, my pleasure.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. And it's sincere. It's not that tough. I'm telling you, if we get to this point, because again, I'm talking too much, but if you want to hear some specific examples, and I promise to be more brief, I've seen things happen in B2B that happens just like in B2C, where I'm the guy who comes in and tries to free these B2B companies. I try to free them from sameness. And let's polarize so we can magnetize.
Yeah.
And suddenly the market starts to come to you in B2B, and the salespeople are like, oh my gosh, I don't have to cold call anymore. This is awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, to that point, like I think Chick-fil-A does just to stay on them for a second, because I think one of the things that we'll typically see, right back to kind of strategy and tactics, what everybody tries to do when we talk about, growing a business, right? It's getting back out to the sales and marketing folks, kind of all the traditional things that we, believe to be true about what it takes to facilitate that exponential growth. And I think one of the interesting things, and I think this is relatively recent with Chick-fil-A, but, I don't know if you caught any of their recent, commercials, right? One, they don't do a ton of advertising, but to the point that they have actually taken that, their little catchphrase at the end, instead of saying thank you, and they turned it into a commercial. Right. Mm-hmm. Where, the worker gets taken, away, in a van, because they said, right, thank you. Right. And I think like the point I'm getting at is that when you start to talk about and utilize these things as examples, right, it's letting those differentiators influence all of the activity versus the other way around. And I think that's something that's challenging. Back to, the previous question, that's challenging for leaders to understand, because we're so used to seeing the kind of strategy and tactics, the day-to-day, all of the traditional levers being pulled. Hey, we're going to do an advertising campaign. Hey, we're going to change, this part of our external marketing, and again, all the while either contributing to the variation we initially unpacked, or just simply missing the mark altogether, because we don't have a deep enough understanding of A, root cause, or B, how to make that customer experience, off the charts.
Well said. Walk into any B2B small company, small business, or this kind of lower to mid market, right? You will find that either you've got somebody who was handed that business from a relative, or it's a portfolio company within private equity, or somebody just had enough money, they went out and bought it. Here's my point. So if the audience is taking notes, this is a big one. They try to take what's already there and improve it, every aspect of it. Let's improve this. Let's improve productivity. Let's improve sales. It's not taking into account what's hurting productivity. How come you can't drive more sales? How come, right? There's no force multipliers. And so as they tinker with finance, IT, customer service, and everybody's trying to work on this strategic plan they set out on January 1st, all it does is create more and more variation in the system, because like you just said, they don't even understand what's happening, what's going on.
Yeah, that's a really smart way to articulate it, because I think that, again, it gets back to what I was trying to ask earlier, in the sense of, we only know what we've experienced previously. So if we've never been able to experience the ability to, to capture that variation and to ultimately understand and then prioritize what those initiatives are, that's why we see the things we see in most organizations, which is, that siloed problem solving, the efficiency at all cost, right? And typically that's within the silo. So it ends up compounding,
right,
the variation, right? And again, which is why I think when folks are in conversations with you, people that have lived it, experienced, sure, we're talking about similar things, but that's where, these force multipliers come in. That's where, this degree of sameness, which I love that phrase, but it's like, there are no new businesses, right? Like you talked about, yellow freight, right? It's like, how many transportation businesses have there been? Will there be? Are there today? But again, how do we stand out? How many fast food or quick serve restaurants brands exist today. And yet you've got, again, B2C example, but you've got Chick-fil-A, right? Like not even open the same number of days, only serve, one
kind of meat.
Right. And so you've got those types of examples. So maybe that's a good kind of entry point to talk a bit more about this, this sameness that we experience and again, how that ultimately contributes to the variation that we see in our financial reports.
So since most companies, we agree, they come from a world of sameness. And I say this with the utmost respect to those listening who have an MBA, a PhD, a bachelor's degree, whatever is education. I have spoken at numerous educational institutions around the country, in fact. In fact, my sister leads one of the biggest community colleges in the Northeast. You speak to these business schools, they're all being taught the same stuff. And as you're trying to trying to execute what you're being taught, especially in the classroom, but then based on all the experience that folks have as they get their business chops, and I'm talking about senior leadership, the things we talked about where they keep adding things. Here's a good example. You and I are sitting in the kitchen and we've been tasked with baking a cake. So we've got a big mixing bowl and we've put in what we think are the right ingredients and, finger test, we taste it and it's like, oh, not sweet enough, probably needs a little more sugar. So Dave puts in a little sugar and we stir it up, right? I'm not sure if we have enough of flour. So Sean adds a little flour. By the time we're done and we put that thing in the oven, it comes out not really good because this is what happens.
Yeah.
Talk to most senior leaders and they will tell you, that's the word that often comes up. Help me with the day-to-day chaos. So we have to gain some clarity around this. And I'll just use two real quick examples and then we'll get specific. I don't know if I've ever shared with you the UPS story. Sometime in the past 25 years, the Teamsters struck UPS. Well, when UPS, this is before Amazon got big.
Yeah.
Number one small package carrier in the country. When they get struck, those packages don't start moving. Everybody who's in sales, administrative, leadership, they have to work all the docks, they have to drive the trucks and so on and so forth. Something very interesting came to light as to why that 3-week strike went on. They tasked their 2,000 strong industrial engineer workforce to go call on customers to make sure that the customers were aware of how things were going. Hey, your packages are still being delivered on time. Here's where we're at in negotiations with Teamsters. It was the industrial engineers, right? 2,000 of them, more than any company of their kind in the world. Dave, do you think that the industrial engineers were asking customers the same questions that the salespeople had been asking?
I guarantee not.
They're very curious types. Hey, can we go in the warehouse? Why are you doing that? How does that work? They're like 2-year-olds.
Yeah.
And the more they learned about the frustrations that their customers were having, after the strike ended, it took about 6 months and they launched UPS Logistics, which became damn near as big as the small package delivery division because of that. You walk into an Apple store, right? Most people that are watching this or listening to this have an Apple store in their area. I will often say to a crowd, if I keynote, a talk, how many salespeople are in your local Apple store? And they'll say, 10, 15, 20. And the answer is 0. There are no salespeople in the Apple store. Those customers are coming in ready to buy. If you don't believe me, watch people walking out of an Apple store and watch how many don't have a bag in their hands.
Yeah.
If they're already walking in pretty much knowing what they already want, the people in there are just facilitating a sale. They're there to show the device, help them with questions. How come we can't do that in B2B? Why can't we build this whole thing on the front end so by the time we get to a customer-facing situation, we can just help them buy?
Yeah. Yeah, it's I did not know that about the UPS story. That's super insightful. I do remember, navigating that, but from a much different perspective, because at that time I was responsible for a facility and we were trying to figure out how to get our products delivered.
Sure.
So even if one of those industrial engineers came to talk to me, it's not where my focus was at the time. But it's super insightful because, again, I think it gets back to, ultimately the framework. And I'd love to touch on that just in terms of specifics and parts. And I'd love for you to just maybe talk a little bit about why we start where we do and how that ultimately ends up in this genesis of kind of delivering unprecedented value. Because I think that kind of ties what you were just saying back together to both the framework and, again, all of what you've learned and experienced, the last 30 odd years.
Appreciate that. I love the fact that you use the word genesis because this is a front end thing. So whether I'm working with a company that's been around 100 years or they've been around 2 years, we have to go back to the beginning. And something you said earlier, you'll see it'll come up second. But first is this issue of, when Deming talked about process improvement and I talk about operational precision, the real way to look at this was that story I told about when I was running this Northern Virginia branch that was fairly large. The first thing I was looking for was waste and rework. And when I saw that we had 10% undelivered freight each day, immediately, I'd been in the business a decade. I knew that damages, loss, right, productivity, I knew it affected all of that. And in the end, ultimately, customers.
Yeah.
So that's all I did. Because I had this framework, I had this knowledge. And so we went in, we uncovered the whole story that I told you, and everything got better. So I'm giving you the three pieces.
Yep.
So when I think of operational precision, it's literally, where's the waste and rework occurring in your company that is directly impacting customers? That's it.
Yeah. I think that's the key, though, because again, there's a lot of folks that talk about waste and rework, that talk about, lean, from that very specific, waste removal perspective. But I think the unlock really becomes that's impacting customers, because we can often get so focused on, call it the minutia, call it the 20% that doesn't move the needle. And I think the biggest unlock in terms of your work experience and then also the framework that you've developed is because it is external. It's felt by customers. And that there again becomes the 80% that we now can step from step one into, step two.
No, it's a great point. And again, for the folks taking notes, what you just said, it's felt by customers. That's a great way to distill it to that. And so now that we can deliver on whatever the customer promise is, in the freight example, it was, they're just trying to get their stuff from point A to point B on time and undamaged.
Yeah.
I mean, if you can't do that, there's something wrong. Going to the second part, now that's a force multiplier, because the more you're focused on eliminating waste and rework. In fact, we'll just play the game because I know you know the answers and it'll save time. If you are forever and ever focused as an organization in all facets of a company, focused on reducing waste and rework, Dave, what should happen to productivity?
Yeah.
Up or down?
Should go up.
And if productivity goes up, should efficiency go up or down?
Should go up. Costs? Should come down.
Customer satisfaction?
Should go up.
We're done. So that's what that's all about. The second part, though, is something you said earlier a few minutes ago. It is very difficult in B2B to find any company where their customers say definitively, this is what they stand for. Rock solid, one sentence, 8 words or less. I know for a fact this is what they stand for. And because 99.9% don't, they're now thrust in a world of sameness. And so when the salespeople say, when I'm the guy who says, again, keynoting, let's say it happens to be 500 salespeople in a room, I'll yell out to the group, tell me the number one objection you've had in the last year. They all say the same thing every time. Pricing. And yet you're gluttons for punishment. Yeah. It happens again and again and again and again. What if we get to the front end, eliminate the root cause, Do you know what happens when you stand for something so profound, so customer centric, that they understand the value you're going to deliver to them just by virtue of your purpose statement? Do you think they question you on price?
Yeah, it's such a non-issue at that point.
So this issue of organizational fitness, and there's a lot of guys who came before me, obviously, Roy Spence Jr., Patrick Lencioni, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, all those kind of folks. They'll call it organizational health. I kicked it up a level. I think it's organizational fitness.
Yeah.
And there are 3 pieces these are all force multipliers. You reduce waste and rework forever and ever, it force multiplies without additional effort, time, money, and so forth. So the organizational fitness piece is the same thing. When you figure out why the organization exists, I'm going to say that again. Why does the organization exist? And what is the difference you're trying to make in people's lives? I'll bet you 9 out of 10, sounds like a broken record, 9 out of 10 business leaders that I speak with, when I say, okay, they don't know anything about me. Tell me why the business exists. 9 out of 10 say to make money.
Yeah.
And that's why they're living in a world of sameness. The business shouldn't be there just to make money. That's how Apple exploded. That's how Amazon exploded. That's how Chick-fil-A exploded. You're not there focused on making money. Making money is just a result. Yeah. Profitability, EBITDA, enterprise value, results. So we need these 3 force multipliers. The first one we talked about, this one is organizational fitness. We have to have purpose. Why does the organization exist, and what's the difference we're making in people's lives? To give you an example how that sounds, I have a fabulous client, one of the first ones I worked with. They're in the design build arena. So they build interactive walls and cool things like that for Division I college sports, professional sports, halls of fame, for different places. They're just amazing. And without going through their whole story, and it took them months to get there, because at the senior level, nobody agreed on why the darn business was even there. Think about this. We liberate people from mediocre experiences. We liberate people from mediocre experiences. So when an opportunity came to them to potentially build the Al Davis Memorial Torch at Allegiant Stadium for the Las Vegas Raiders, right in Las Vegas, they had a decision to make. Spend $3 million of our own money to buy the world's largest 3D printer or not. And they said, as a leadership team, does it help liberate people from mediocre experience? Yes, great. Then we're going to go spend all this money and build it. And from there, they can hold that up to anybody who wants to do business with them and say, this is the kind of work we do. Yeah. The other 2 go faster. Not to throw, because I wouldn't, not to be disrespectful to EOS, which is the Entrepreneurial Operating System. But I'm not a huge fan. It has its place. But they talk a lot about mission. It's what they're teaching business leaders. I then have to come in afterwards, once they've graduated from developing an operating system, that now they want a growth system. Yeah. 2 very different things. And I'll say mission is the core strategy. It's the short-term core strategy that fulfills the purpose. So you can't have mission without purpose. And I didn't invent that. Roy Spence Jr., Pat Lencioni, and a whole bunch of people smarter than me figured this out. So you have to have this higher calling, this true north, this cause that you need people to believe in, right? It's when you said, what does the company stand for? It's what does that organization believe in its heart and soul? That helps you hire the right people, that forges alignment, which reduces waste and rework and reduces variation. See how this all is an ecosystem? Yeah. Yeah. So mission is what's the short-term core strategy that fulfills the purpose. That's why my clients, generally speaking, don't do annual strategic planning. Once they finish their 6 to 9 month mission, it's the most important short-term thing they can do to fulfill their purpose. They just move on to the next one. Yeah. So then we talk about core behaviors. I'm not a values guy, Dave. You know how many companies I've walked into? What are the values you usually see laminated on the card that they've handed out to employees? What are the types of values you see?
Oh, it's, I mean, it's a bunch of, it's a bunch of, I'll be kind, it's a bunch of words, a bunch of adjectives that, are not lived behaviors. And I think that's what I appreciate about the way you frame this in terms of the behavior, because it's action oriented. And so it's very easy to measure those behaviors against, and both from a senior leadership perspective, but then becomes a lived experience for all the folks in the organization.
Very well said. Couldn't agree more. Not only did I lead 2 sizable organizations and 2 different Fortune 500 companies, I've been a president and COO of other businesses. It's real easy when you have kind of for lack of a better term, even though I don't like the term performance reviews, to say, Dave, you're an operations supervisor inside the company. I think you do great work. Of our 3 core behaviors, can you give me some examples of how you've exhibited those in the past quarter? The behaviors are action oriented, and they should be there as pistons to the purpose and mission engines. Action that bring it to life, right? I'll keep this part short. I've got one client of the many that I have, and I'll never forget one of their core behaviors. And remember now, you use this on the front end to hire people. They said they're in third-party logistics, which there's 15,000 competitors in the US. I was
going to say real, not, what is that, blue ocean there, right? 3PLs, I'm sure they'd all agree with that.
Correct. Although today, at least to their constituency out there, they're kind of a category of one inside of this sea of sameness, because one of their core behaviors is, and everybody has to live it, you can be fired over not exhibiting this behavior. They say to customers and to each other, we don't effing lie. If we're going to miss shipments, we call the customer and tell them what's happening. We don't lie no matter what.
Yeah.
Because they believe this integrity issue is huge. So the core behaviors, I'll leave this part at that. We'll move on to value. But the key thing, again, for folks taking notes, you have to 99% own it. It's proprietary. It's not invention, Dave. It's that organization. You have to say it's excavation.
Yeah.
What allowed us to be successful up till now? And you got to spend a lot of time having a drink or a beer or something and getting people to open up and say, we don't effing lie. That's what makes us great.
Yeah, I'm going to let you get to the last one. I have so much I want to respond with. I'm going to let you finish first.
So the last one, right, is how do we use design thinking and critical thinking to come up with a customer value proposition that nobody else has? Now think about this. There's a reason why it comes third. If we're operationally precise and our costs go down, it's kind of like when Honda came into the US many years ago. Their costs were lower, but they could charge more because their quality was higher. But either way, they're operationally precise. They deliver on the brand promise regularly. They're organizationally fit, and that is felt externally, right? It's to be lived, not laminated. Already, you've got 2 very powerful things that have a lot of legs on each one, by the way. You have 2 very powerful things that will start to inform your value proposition, right? In terms of what you do. Think about the UPS story I told. Sure, you can compete with DHL and all those other small package firms, or you can come out with UPS logistics and say, we can help improve your entire supply chain experience.
Yeah.
I am here to tell you, and then you take it from here. Virtually every company I've ever dealt with, and by the way, I've made all these mistakes. I don't want to sound like I'm pontificating. I learned all this by mistake, meaning I've made all these mistakes. They don't know their customer. Yeah. It's the last story I'll tell. I think I told it to you very fast. I have a commercial furniture distributor led by a woman who's awesome, but she's a salesperson by nature, formed the company, founded it. You know how many different furniture distributors there are in every city? Lots. Do you want Herman Miller? Do you want Steelcase? Do you want, right? I sent her, I was working with her, sent her away for a month with her sales team and said, go talk to every sizable customer you have and ask them what they're discussing in their Monday morning meetings, and specifically, what are the KPIs on the dashboard? She comes back and she's beaming. I said, Courtney, what's the deal? She said, "Oh my gosh," she goes, "I figured out how we should be positioned in the marketplace." She called it the Fab Five. She found out how the environment, including the office furniture and the desks and all these other things, can impact workplace happiness, employee engagement, employee churn, employee happiness, sickness, illness. She had all these things that they were tracking that she didn't realize. So she started keynoting I live in the Kansas City area. She keynoted all over this town for a year. I think her business tripled. And do you think she had to compete on price anymore?
That's unbelievable. And what a great story.
You got to know your customers, and most don't. So ethnography is the word of the day.
Yeah, that's man, so many great, so many great points that that you brought up in just unpacking those three kind of core pillars. For me, the favorite, because I think it's where a lot of the, meat comes together, is the organizational fitness. I think it's it sets the tone, obviously, for the third one, but it's such an unlock, because I think a lot of folks get the operational precision. And I think we could, have some nice discourse on, the level to which folks participate in that. But beyond that, this idea around really understanding our customers, really understanding why we show up in the morning. I know just through our conversations, it's really got me thinking about my own business, about businesses that I've led, how I've shown up in those things, and thinking critically about exactly what you said in terms of how to start to outline some of that, and really, again, what it means to be felt in the experiences that you deliver, regardless of if you're in a consulting business, a product-based business, any other service-based business. Sure. So, personally for me, that one is really, kind of takes it. I just love that aspect. I love the way that you frame it. And I've seen, whether it's EOS or, there's eMyth is very similar in terms of, providing folks a framework, but it's kind of like, well, now what? There's no slide against them. They're doing their work in again, kind of their experience. But this is totally different than that. And, that's just what I love about it. I was so excited to have you on the podcast to talk through this. So, and I know we're kind of winding down on time. So first thing I want to say is I'd love to invite you back and continue this conversation, because I think there's just so much that we can unpack through here that would be truly valuable and insightful for the folks that are tuning into this. So that is number one. Number two is what I think I'd like to do is maybe we could start at one tactical nugget for folks out there. Something that maybe is in that, beyond the operational precision, but maybe in this bucket of organizational fitness. A question to kind of start folks thinking about where they really stand in terms of that pillar. So I'll pause here and let you answer that, and then we can wind up the episode for today.
So let's do that. I've mentioned, and thank you, I've mentioned a few times that this thing is an ecosystem. And I learned that as I was working through this, yellow freight, total quality management, what is it, learning from Deming and others. Let me give you one example, since we're going to stay on this organizational fitness piece for a moment, which is guiding principles, right? What guides the company, kind of like guardrails. I actually had a moment with Dr. Deming before he passed many, many years ago. And I asked him one question. I said, "Sir," I said, your stuff is globally known. I mean, for God's sake, you took this little tiny country in the South Pacific and made it a global economic superpower. I said, what are we not seeing these days, like in the books that you've written, the keynotes you've given? What can I take home? And he was a dying man. He was like 90. He looked at me and he said, "Sean," he said, "the greatest source of variation in companies that erodes costs, hurts profitability, and eventually hurts customers," he goes, the number one cause of it is in the C-suite. He said the people at the top don't agree why the company exists and the difference you're trying to make in people's lives. He goes, that's how silos will start. So I wanted to share that he said, because all this stuff got bastardized into lean manufacturing, Six Sigma, and all of that.
Yep.
Here the guy is telling me 30 years ago, no, it's in the C-suite. It's at the top level. So here would be the takeaway. Here's the tactical. When you think about purpose, it does have to be 7 or 8 words tops, because it's got to have clarity. And it takes a while. I said this earlier, kind of like with core behaviors. It's excavation. It's usually there, but it's beneath the surface, right? Ask yourself questions. This is people taking notes. Talk about when the company was founded. What made it successful? And really spend time on that, right? And you will distill this thing down over time to say, oh my gosh, this is our secret sauce. This is our true north. This is what we do. And if we do this, and if we focus on this, everything gets better. So that's the first thing. And I would ask, so that's right, it's excavation. Look at the founding. And the second piece tactically is this. The US, greatest nation, greatest civilization ever devised. We are not without our warts, but still the greatest civilization that's ever been devised. I always say, when you're having this group discussion with the senior leadership team, and I'm not selling here, of course, because I don't believe in selling, but you got to usually have somebody from the outside who can look at all this and draw it on a whiteboard, I always say that the U.S., the way those founding fathers wrote the Constitution, it had to do because they were trying to they were liberating themselves from tyranny. What are you trying to liberate customers from? That's what I'm trying to get to, is ask yourself the question, What are we trying to liberate customers from? Because I believe when you do these 3 things we've talked about, now you've got something to go to market with. That's the marketing. But if you don't have any of this, all you're doing is marketing sameness, and it just makes it worse.
Yeah.
So ask yourself that question, right? It's what are we liberating them from? What are our customers having to put up with from us and our competitors? Spend time on that, and that's a great place to go find your purpose.
Yeah, boy, what a great starting point for folks out there. Because I think, whether you're reading something, whether you're listening to a podcast, wherever you happen to be getting some insight from, I think often that's where the gap starts to exist. It's like, practically, how do I go from A to B? And again, I do completely agree that, you need to be guided through a lot of these conversations because, again, the experience ultimately is what helps to unpack the clarity, right? You've seen it, you've heard it, you can continue to probe and ask questions and peel the onion back. And I really like the thought process around the excavation, because I think it's visual for people. Whether you've got a company that's only been around for 5 or 10 years, or you've got a 50 or 100-year-old company, there's a reason that you've made it to 5 or 10 years, let alone the 50 or 100. So digging deep and trying to be mindful and understand that. And then I think the other point to reiterate from my perspective, because again, I've seen this often, and it's interesting, back to Deming and the C-suite, thought process, because I think, as whether it was myself entering a new org, hiring somebody else for a senior leadership team, or seeing those dynamics play out in real time in, both my career and now as an independent consultant, I think you do, everybody brings that in. But if there's no cohesive vision, if there's no true north, if there's no greater thing that we are, measuring our folks that we're hiring up against, and then again, back to the behavioral, how are we doing this and demonstrating it on any given day, it becomes so much easier to build the walls up, to be in a box, and to just constantly seek efficiency within your bounds of responsibility. And then again, we're just go back to contributing to that variation. So what a great way to wrap that up.
That third-party logistics company I mentioned, where they said one of their core behaviors is we don't F and lie. I could tell you their purpose, but the point is think about the HR side of this. Again, it's an ecosystem. You just mentioned, so I'm giving you all the credit here, right? the hiring process totally changes. You better have a pretty open-minded HR person who understands we need to screen for purpose. Can they exhibit these core behaviors? That's the hiring process. And that streamlines everything, saves money, builds up the walls, like you said. Customers feel it. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, to that point, right? Like, how often have you been into, sat in on an interview series, right? Where we really have, we're looking for a skill-based thing. We have no, greater purpose that we're measuring up against. So it becomes very challenging to understand, is this person going to be a contributor to what we're building here, or, simply be a distraction? And the distraction here, to me, it's a non-skill set issue. They could be the most skilled person. I used this as an example with somebody recently. You can hire the most skilled person, right? All of the credentials, whether that's traditional education, just work experience. But if they don't understand what they're driving towards, the act, the tactics, the strategy, all of it will take way longer, and I would argue would be marginally successful compared to somebody that has less skills, a desire, but then also understands and is aligned with where we're actually headed to.
Gosh, we are so on the same page. I couldn't agree with you more. And maybe one last confirmation. Everything you just said, that third-party logistics company, they're in a stagnant industry, right? It's not like the economy's growing. They're up 500% the last 3 years. So that's awesome. Business they took from somebody else.
Yeah, that's incredible. Sean, for folks that want to connect with you, where's the best place for them to find you at?
Oh, I think there's two places. You can certainly connect with me on LinkedIn. That's a great place. A lot of good information there too. I post almost daily. I'm not as prolific as you are, but I try. You and I both know you should try to share the knowledge, right? And not keep it tight to the vest. Yeah. So I'm getting better at sharing. And the other place is just off of the website, which is www.the stands for Demand Creation Institute, thedci.co, not .com, .co.
Perfect. And I'll make sure to put those links in the show notes for folks. They can connect with you quickly there. Sean, thanks so much for coming on the Everyday Business Problems podcast.
I'm so happy to have been here. Thank you for the opportunity. It's great.
Thank you so much for listening today. If we brought you any value, please rate, subscribe, and share our podcast. Also, be sure to connect with us on social media by searching @The Crysler Club. Until next week, I'm your host, Dave Crysler.